Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Salem. And our question tonight comes to us from Amp2K1, who asks, how do pagans see the gods? And I have to tell you that I'm hard-pressed to think of any question that would be harder to answer in a 10-minute vlog format than this. Nonetheless, I shall give it a shot. The first answer to this question, how do pagans see the gods, is that many pagans see the gods very differently from other pagans, and there is no one answer. Pagans see the gods in a wide range of different ways, ranging from individual beings, to spiritual archetypes, to transcendent cosmic powers. And depending on the individual tradition, as well as the individual practitioner, the point of view can vary widely. Not only that, but it can also vary from individual to individual, even within a tradition, because it is so dependent on the subjective personal relationship to deity. Now, having said that, we can attempt to answer the question from the point of view of the particular tradition I belong to, the Correllian tradition, and what the Correllian point of view is. And the Correllian point of view regarding the deities is that the way that we would regard the deities depends entirely from the level at which we are looking at them, and that the deities can be anything from very specific personalities with which you have a concrete relationship to the overreaching cosmic force of the universe, which is ultimately far removed from human experience. And that everything in between is equally valid with those two extremes, depending on how you're interacting with deity. And that how you interact with deity is really what determines the nature of your relationship. What do I mean by that? Part of what I mean by that is that some people are very philosophical in how they look at life, and they're much more likely to deal with the transcendent cosmic power. Other people can be very emotional, or for other reasons want a specific personality that they are identifying with, and need to be able to identify with that very specific face of deity. However, both of these aspects, both ends of the continuum, are equally valid. I would compare it, for example, perhaps to a tree. A tree can be many different things depending on how you're interacting with it. If you're interacting with it as a whole, it's a tree. But at the same time that it's a tree, it's a collection of many different branches joined by a trunk. Each of those branches, in some ways, is very different. Not only that, but if you're working with a particular branch, there may be many different twigs on that branch. And each of those twigs is individual unto itself. And on each of those twigs, maybe a number of leaves. And those leaves can be dealt with as an archetype of all leaves, or as a single leaf, unique in itself, depending entirely on what you're doing with that tree and its parts, and how you're approaching it. If you're trying to define what a tree is, you will have one relationship with that tree. If you're an artist trying to depict the tree, you'll have a particular relationship with the tree. If you're a crafter who's doing leaf rubbings, you'll have a very particular relationship, not so much with the tree as with the particular leaves, and so forth through many different variations. When we talk about deity, deity can be the overarching cosmic power of the universe, which we Correllians like to portray as the cosmic diamond, a single force with many different facets. Or it can be the individual facets, which is to say the many different faces of deity in all their different personalities. Or it can be the different archetypes of deity, which cover whole continuums of different particular deities who are grouped together by quality and similar energy. In the question, Amp2K1 specifically mentions Hermes and Thoth, the Egyptian god, and whether or not they are the same or different. And the answer is, depends entirely on how you're working with them. To the ancient Egyptians, specifically the Ptolemaic Egyptians, they were considered the same power. If you go back farther to the native Egyptian pharaohs, they wouldn't have known who Hermes was. It really depends in terms of their point of view on when you're looking. In terms of what you will get, it really depends on how you approach the deity. And I'll give you an example of this. Many years ago, I knew two women who were both priestesses of the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. Sekhmet, as you may know, is the lion-headed goddess, often described as a goddess of war, but usually thought of in the modern context as a goddess of feminine empowerment, protection, and power. Each of these two women, as far as I can see, were legitimately spiritual people, and their priestesshood was completely legitimate. However, their relationship to the deity they mutually served was completely different. To the one woman, Sekhmet was a very narrow, orthodox, even fundamentalist type of Egyptian deity who could only be approached in very specific ways. To the other priestess, Sekhmet was very much a modern syncretic deity who could be approached through any number of different avenues. And this came to a head between the two women when one of them was going to be married and had asked the other one to be the maid of honor in the ceremony. And at the last minute, the Orthodox priestess had a sign from the goddess that she must not take part in this ceremony because it was not an ancient Egyptian ceremony. And of course, the syncretic priestess had no such sign. And to all appearances, Sekhmet was quite pleased with the syncretic priestess calling upon her in this very modern ceremony. I would say that the difference between the experience of the two women has nothing to do with which one was closer to Sekhmet or which one had the true relationship with Sekhmet. I would say they both had perfectly valid relationships with their patron goddess. They were just different because they were approaching her from very different backgrounds and mindsets. I would say that the energy that is regarded as Sekhmet could certainly fit itself into any circumstance, because, if we as humans can fit ourselves into many different circumstances, then surely anything we consider to be a deity could do the same. The idea that our deities are smaller and more rigid than ourselves is ridiculous. But the particular priestesses had their own mindsets that they had to come from. And so when we ask about Hermes and Thoth, it's really everything has to do with your own mindset in approaching it. Because the deity that you are working with will respond to you largely in kind to where you are coming from. And if you expect that deity to be severe and limited and harsh, it will be. And if you expect that deity to be wise and knowing, it will be that too, because you're allowing it to express that aspect of its being to you. And if you expect that deity to be a lens into the transcendent cosmic power, it will be that as well. It's all a matter of how much of that energetic nature of deity you can let through. And we all have a particular lens that we are seeing it through. So, my answer to you ultimately is that it really depends very much on how you're approaching deity and how much of deity you can yourself perceive. And that deity can express itself to you, or themselves to you, or however you want to look at it, in a wide range of different ways, dependent on what you need and also what you can accept. Now, in other vlogs, we've talked about spirit messaging, and how the messenger warps the message. And if your spirit guide, or your ancestor, or your deity wants to say something to you that you cannot accept, if you cannot accept it, you will not be able to hear it. And it's the same here. So when we talk about your personal relationship to deity, if you come with a lot of preconceived notions, deity will not necessarily be able to communicate with you beyond those preconceptions. And so it's better not to have a lot of preconceptions. And you will find that deity, whether you're talking again about the transcendent cosmic powers or very precise personalities, you'll find that they're all very wide-ranging. And deity is always much more than merely human. So, I hope that answers your question. There's not a lot of depth you can go into in this particular format, but I have done my best, and until next time, may you blessed be.